Okay, we have lesson 35 today, this morning. Today would have been the last day of the course, but we had to postpone the course for 2 weeks. That means also we have 2 more Sundays to go. So the last class day will be the 9th of July. Next week and 1 more. Okay, lesson 35, we continue philosophy of the Kleshas. Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, chapter 2, Sutra 30. As long as the root is there, it must ripen and result in lives of different class, length, and experiences. So, we have come across the idea in Buddhism that we need to live through 1,000,000 lives to deal with all our karma. And this sutra is referring to that. Karma is like a porridge, porridge with berries. You only see some of the berries that are at the surface of the porridge. All the berries that are below the surface you can't see. Karma is like that. Living life as a yogi, interestingly, causes the porridge to be stirred. That is why the life of a yogi becomes rather dynamic. I've sometimes said that life of a yogi is very boring, but that's only in the eyes of normal people. Because your life is not external anymore, it becomes more and more internal. As a result of that, which is of course consciousness, sensitivity, you become aware of your karma. You become aware of your kleshas caused by internal steerings. Karma that is inside you attracts karma from the environment. For normal people, or according to yoga, ignorant people, ignorance is the first klesha, as you remember. So that means people who are not conscious, they just keep repeating the same samskara in this life. They keep attracting the same klesha in this life. And as a result of that, they keep suffering the same misery all their life. And lamenting themselves, lamenting their life, saying, I'm so pitiful and I can't help myself and I can't do anything about it. So you're very limited to that berry in the porridge. It takes up all your attention, it takes up all your energy, and so naturally you're kind of stuck, which is the condition that most people, if you look around, the condition that most people are in. So you need at least 1,000,000 reincarnations to address all the other currents in the porridge, all the other karma that you carry with you without knowing it. Practicing yoga or any other spiritual practice that actually works leads to consciousness, increased sensitivity, and it leads to a very dynamic path of growth and development that is based on you becoming conscious of that eternal cycle. You start becoming conscious of the cause of your suffering, your misery. And that gives you the power to take control. You learn, from now on, you start learning from that misery. What do you learn? In the first place, you learn who you really are. You learn that karma that you carry inside you. Because every time you express yourself, it has a certain vibration that attracts a vibration from the outside, from the people that you are dealing with. And if that is an unpleasant reaction, it leads to conflict, it leads to unhappiness. An unhappiness that, if you look back, has been bothering you all your life. And now you start to see it consciously. And you realize that if you could change the way that you act, that misery will not be attracted to you anymore. You will not have to suffer this anymore. Sounds easy, sounds simple. That's not the case. Another sutra will address that. It also means that you're never done. There are many people who say, if I work hard, I can, the rest of my life, I can spend comfortably. There is an expression in English that I am not sure of, but in Dutch we say, having all your sheep in a dry area. You work hard, you accomplish many things in an early stage, and then you can ride out the rest of your life comfortably. It doesn't work like that for a yogi, because it is not about your material comfort. It's not about your material possession. For a yogi, being on this path, when you have purified, as we call it, when you have dealt with a portion of your karma, you think you are done, another one will come. The porridge will be stirred and another current will come. Another berry will come to the surface. If you think of it, you may think, this is so exhausting. But that is in the beginning of your development. Your negative sentiment will turn into gratitude because you see that you grow enormously. If you look back now, 1 year, you see that you have changed, while others have not. If you look back 5 years later from now, you see change compared to today. If you look back 10 years from now, you see again a lot of change compared to 5 years ago. I got that confirmed a couple of times when meeting an ex-student after 3 or 4 years with their jaw dropping. Ron, is that you? Wow, you have really changed. Of course, I'm still the same ugly Ron with crooked nose and no hair on his head. But you feel the change in the energy, in the vibration, the increasing maturity inside. As a yogi, you will feel that too, in other people, in yourself as well. So that is the whole idea behind Buddhism and yoga, is actually to reduce these 1,000,000 lives that you have to go through. 1,000,000 lives of misery, as we see it. by going through a lot of karma that otherwise would take so many lives. Once you experience that, you wouldn't want to change it. You wouldn't want to go back to your ignorant condition in which growth basically is, well, it's almost non-existent. I'm not talking about material growth, like promotions and diplomas, but talking about spiritual growth, mental growth. It is very important here that you pick up the glove of the challenges that you come across. Because we have a tendency, which is only human, to be stuck in the patterns that we were given this life by karma. Why do we get stuck? Because we identify with that pattern, with that karma. We identify with our misery. And we say, that I am. Example, I was born 19 years after the Second World War, after the end of the Second World War. In the first 30 years of my life or so, I had no idea about my karma related to that event. But my whole family was in fact the victim of the Second World War. Because of my mom's traumatic experiences with famine, poverty, more even my dad's experiences. He's the only survivor of an extended family. Instead of counting his blessings, he lamented his life. Instead of being grateful for being the only one that survived, he spent all his life being miserable. And that's a mistake that you and I as yogis should not make. I told you about my two brothers. They made that mistake. Why? They couldn't help themselves, like my dad couldn't help himself, being stuck in the misery with which he identified, leading to a cycle, a vicious cycle of attracting the same misery again and again, and always blaming others for it. That is natural, that is human. But it is also the reason why we suffer. And who wouldn't want to stop that suffering? I want. I know you want to. Everybody would want to do it. We just don't know how. Yoga gives the answers. It really does. But you have to work for it. Next time when you identify with your misery, you have to say, I am not that. This is not me. I am not my dad. I'm not my dad's misery. I'm not the Second World War. Or whatever it is, that everybody has their own misery, their own karma. I'm talking about my dad and the Second World War so you can recognize in a practical way what I'm trying to explain. But we all do this. We all function like this. So try to stop identifying with that misery. Very difficult, because that identification, in spite of the misery, gives us a strange sense of comfort. We become kind of melancholical when we feel our misery. There's a whole musical genre dedicated to drowning ourselves in misery. It's the blues. Soul music, blues music. It's glorifying misery. And why is it a music genre? Because we all like to glorify our misery. Subconsciously we do that. It's human. Don't feel bad about it. Don't regret it. Simply try to avoid it. I've spent years identifying with my misery, and my dad's misery, and my brother's misery. Little by little, I chipped away, and the energy that I preserved in that way, I directed towards my own goals that have nothing to do, or maybe they were my fuel. It became my fuel for another destiny. That is what you do as a yogi. You create your own dharma, your own destiny, your own future. Not in one day, not in 1 week, 1 month, or 1 year. That is something that will keep you occupied for the rest of your life from now on. 힘들어요. That is Korean for it's exhausting. Yes. But in spite of that, you feel great. Why? Because for the first time in your life, you feel that you're living your own life and not somebody else's. Can you see that? So it starts with consciousness. And Patanjali is giving us all the philosophical tools, all the theoretical tools. The consciousness is created simply through your practice, standing still. That is why standing still is so powerful. On the surface it looks very boring, but it leads to an incredible opening up of consciousness, an incredible transformation of the human being. And the rest of the work is to start using that consciousness. Stop making that stupid mistake of that eternal, of that vicious cycle. Every time again, ending up in the same misery. This sutra, coming back to the actual text of the sutra, also explains why, on the surface, my life seems to be different from your life. And each student in this class's life seems to be different from the other student's life. But the reality is we all have to go through the same miseries in life. And when you understand that, that will lead to a sense of family, a sense of brother or sistership. You will stop being judgmental because you realize that the misery that you see, or the flaws, the mistakes that you see in other people, that could have been you. And vice versa. Because sooner or later, if you believe in reincarnation, you will have to deal with the same misery as the person you are now looking at and being judgmental of. The message here is, let me give you an example again. You know, these days, phenomenon is billionaires. There are many, many billionaires because the economy the past 40 years has been booming. Research shows that almost all billionaires, I say almost, not all, but almost all billionaires started with nothing. Self-made billionaires. Almost all. They started poor. Research also shows that people who inherit wealth, because their parents created wealth, very often lose it. People who inherit wealth, wealth that has been created, often goes lost in 1 or 2 generations. It's statistics, it's research. That is karma. The people who created wealth were driven by something, passionate about something, fueled by something. It can be anger, it can be rage, it can be trauma. It very often is. What those people show is that rather than being miserable about your misery, turn it into fuel, turn it into your asset. Have you noticed that many people who reach the top in politics or in business, they have very funny names? You know what that means? When they were children, they were teased a lot because of their funny names. You remember what happened in school. Students with funny names are always picked on. Their names being distorted in nasty ways. Some of those people who have been bullied are miserable the rest of their lives, with self-destructive behavior like drinking and drugs and what have you. Some of those people, they use their anger to fuel them to do something special, to do something other people cannot achieve. And it brings them to the top. They become champions, they become leaders, fueled by their karma, not destroyed by their karma. They end up like that because their parents guide them well through their misery, or because they naturally have that ability because in previous life they have already dealt with it. But statistically, many people go down under with their misery. For us as yogis, statistically that percentage should be much bigger, because now you know how it works, which means that you have a choice. You allow yourself to go down with your misery. Patanjali in another sutra says, you are a fool. We will come to that, Sutra 60. Or are you going to roll up your sleeve and go to work? Start doing the difficult work. Like I said, not easy. On the contrary, it's the most difficult thing to do. That is why you are a warrior as a yogi. There is another statistic, by the way. It's about money, about wealth. A couple of years ago, the editor, the guy who edited all the handouts with nice illustrations and improving the grammar and build-up of sentences, etc. He one day presented me with an article from, I don't remember which magazine, but if you Google it, you can find it. was an article about the wealthy players in the basketball league in the United States. And the article was about the fact that within 5 years of retirement, I don't know if it's exactly 5 years, but within a short amount of years of retirement, more than 75% of those wealthy sports people lose their wealth. Strange, huh? And you think that's hard to believe. Another statistic, people who win the lottery. Most people who win the lottery lose their wealth within a couple of years. They have no control. Even better, once it is all gone, when being interviewed, they say, "Oh, I'm so happy. I can go back to my normal life again." The money that they earned just suddenly, without having to work for it, without having to build up towards it, developing control and common sense, has poisoned them. Good. Sutra 15. To the people who have developed discrimination, all is misery on account of the pain resulting from change, anxiety, and tendencies, as also on account of the conflicts between the functioning of the gunas and the vrittis of the mind. Do you know Vikings? Netflix series, Vikings? No? It's based on historical fact, but for the sake of smooth story, they also mixed up things, and there's also fiction involved. But I came across a very wise quote from, what was his name again? King Egbert, who lived about 1,000 years ago or so. And he said, "All is vanity and vexation of spirit. In such wisdom is much grief, and he that increases knowledge increases sorrow." That is Patanjali Sutra. In other words, it is the realization that increasing consciousness and sensitivity leads to increased misery and suffering. The sutra, again, the first part of the sutra says, to the people who have developed discrimination, which is you as yoga practitioners developing consciousness, becoming more sensitive. To the people who have developed discrimination, all is misery on account of the pain resulting from change, anxiety, and tendencies, etc. I have told you several times from the beginning of this course that people who practice yoga without proper study of the texts that are the foundation of yoga very often end up in misery, suffering, emotional distress. That is this. That is we have arrived here at the point where Patanjali is confirming that is a phenomenon that happens in people who develop consciousness. But like we talked about in the previous sutta, that is not something that you should passively accept. That is why we need these kind of texts. We have a tendency to identify with our misery and the misery that we see. So we have to disidentify with that, otherwise it will destroy us, distract us. Try to be aware of that. Now Patanjali gives a couple of daily life situations that simplify the problem a little bit. But he says misery, for example, occurs when you are confronted with change. You go to work every day, day after day, week after week, maybe several years. Then suddenly, without your choice, without your responsibility, involvement, the company goes bankrupt. Or for any other reason, you lose your job. What happens? Stress, which equals misery in Patanjali's language. Or you live in a neighborhood and you are used to take a certain bus to go to work or university or whatever. You go every day. But the government never stands still, so they are building and building, and they are building a new subway line in your neighborhood, going through your neighborhood. Now the subway line is completed, starts operating, and they cancel your bus line. Have you ever had such a situation? You will be upset for days. Because that subway doesn't bring you to where you need to go, and that bus is gone. So you have to now take another bus, or you have to take the subway and then transfer to another and to another. In the beginning, you grumble, you complain, you're upset. How do you deal with that as a yogi? First of all, of course, be aware. Life will not be such that for the next 60 years you can use that bus line. There maybe are no buses anymore in 60 years. There's always going to be change. But the human being, simple as we are in a kind of way in our functioning, doesn't like change. It's just an instinct. So of course you're going to be upset like everybody else, but as a yogi you immediately intervene. You immediately step in and say, well, you know, we can't stop progress. We can't stop change. Actually, this subway is electric. And the buses that are being cancelled, that will save us a lot of pollution. No, even better. There is a very nice coffee shop in the subway station that didn't exist before. And now before you get on the subway, you can actually buy a very nice coffee to go on your way. You just have to turn something negative into something positive. And there's always a positive, if only you want to see it. And that is the work that you have to do, consciously. Anxiety. Anxiety is fear. Fear of things that have not even happened yet. Things in the future cause anxiety because we can't control it. We fear that we won't have a house anymore. We fear that there are so many things to fear. And a human being, the functioning of every human being is for the most part based on fear, without us even knowing it. But now you become a person developing discrimination, in the words of Patanjali, and you become aware of those fears. You start suffering more now from those fears. You become overly sensitive if you're not aware of it and do not control it, steer it into another direction. That is where surrender comes from. Surrender means accepting things as they are, and that also means trusting that things will end up well. Trusting that God or the universe or whatever you want to call it will take care of you and your future. It may seem uncertain now, scary, but if you look back, you will see a pattern that things always ended up well. And that pattern will continue further down the road. But it also depends, of course, on the steps that we take. We know now from the philosophy of the Kleshas, if we have a negative attitude, negative things will be attracted to us. Negative things will happen. If we have a positive attitude, more and more positive things are being attracted to us. So we have to make adjustments there. Anxiety is a very deep-rooted instinct that you cannot dismiss and you should not ignore, but you have to take control of it, otherwise it paralyzes you. It keeps you from living life. It keeps you from being happy. It keeps you from doing the things that you actually want to do or need to do. But it is a very powerful force that we should acknowledge. And based on that, we can then gradually take control of it and shape our own future. Not dismissing the fears, but also not allowing the fears to paralyze us from living our lives. Tendencies are habits. We now live in the time of internet. But before the internet, I had a subscription on a newspaper. And in Holland, before I came to Korea, I lived on the 5th floor without elevator. So in the morning, around 5 o'clock, between 5 and 6, the newspaper is delivered. So to get my newspaper, I have to go all the way down. And then back up again. Normally the newspaper is in the mailbox, but today it's not there. You open the mailbox and no newspaper. Your whole world falls apart. Because you are so used to go up the stairs, enjoy a nice cup of coffee, and just going through the news of the day. That is tendency. It's something that makes you comfortable, something you enjoy doing. So you grumble. You grab the phone and you call the newspaper, the district office of the newspaper. What the hell is this? Your guy didn't drop newspaper in my mailbox this morning, and what am I paying all this money for every month for my subscription? If you pay attention, you're just poisoning yourself inside. You know how I would solve the problem? I would just go back up again, after, of course, feeling the disappointment and the anger, and I would take the last Saturday newspaper, which has many sections about vacation, about cars, about politics, about sailing, about... The Saturday newspaper is 100 pages thick because it has many sections about psychology, about the universe, very interesting. But usually you have no time for that. So no newspaper on Tuesday or Wednesday. Okay, then I will go through my Saturday newspaper instead of acting like a human being and getting upset and angry and even ruining other people's lives with my phone call. Of course you call, and the newspaper will be delivered later, maybe around 11 o'clock. But you just, in a calm voice, tell the guy at the phone, hey, I didn't get my newspaper today, can you deliver? Because they do. There is one special deliverer who, later in the morning, goes through the whole district to deliver the newspapers that were missed, that were not delivered. So you know how it works, and just do not let it bother you. It's a choice. From now on, because you're conscious, it's a choice. Feel the initial upset, irritation, anger. That is only normal. You cannot avoid that, also not as a yogi. But then, what you do different is that you step in and say, hey, wait, there are ways that I can deal with this. There are constructive ways, positive ways that I can handle this. There's no need to, I don't have to have my whole day ruined just because of this one thing. It's tendency. It's a habit. And you can think of many habits that you have. You're usually not aware of your habits until you are confronted with a situation where your habit is disturbed. You work in a school or a company or at home. You're used to having your meals at certain times. You're used to having your coffee, your tea at certain times. Now the coffee machine breaks down and there is only one. Tendency, habit. The normal reaction simply is to get upset, to not accept. Useless. Accept, surrender. Try to find a way to solve the problem instead of just suffering from the problem. In the end, you will solve the problem anyway, because you have no other choice. So you might as well just reduce the time from the discovery to the time of solving the problem, being upset, just reduce that as much as possible towards the time of discovery. The gunas and the vrittis, that's a little bit complex. But gunas is tamas, rajas and sattva. And the vrittis are, you remember how it worked, the philosophy of the Kleshas? There are samskaras, which is memory embedded in you, but it is dormant. So that is your karma deeply embedded within you. But it doesn't manifest. It doesn't bother you or cause you misery or anything, but it's there. It's the berries that are under the surface in the porridge. That is a samskara. Samskara, when touched, when you find yourself in a certain situation where the samskara is triggered, awakened, then it becomes a vritti. The vritti is your action, your way of reacting in a certain situation. It's a way of reacting that is unique to you, because another person in the same situation would react differently because they have no such samskara, or the samskara has a different quality. So the reaction is unique to you. And therefore your misery is unique to you. The reaction that comes from the environment is a reaction that other people don't experience. So it's unique to you. That last part of the sutra, where the functioning conflicts between the functioning of the gunas and the vrittis, that is, depending on the condition you are in, whether you are tamas, rajas or sattva, the manifestation of the vritti will be different. In tamas, you would have an internal reaction, feeling miserable, depressed, becoming moody, allowing your day to be ruined. That is a typical tamas kind of way to reacting to the vritti. In rajas, it starts internal, but then you explode and you express yourself. You grab the phone in anger and you shout at the people on the other side of the line, giving out blame and insults and what have you. So that's a very different way of the same vritti expressing itself in tamas. In sattva, and this is what is important for us, in sattva you feel the affliction, you feel the disturbance, the disruption, anger or any other emotion. But because you're in a sattva condition, your consciousness takes over. And you look at the situation in a way that you would not be able to look at it when you were in a tamas or a rajas condition. So this gives you a moment of reflection where not only do you see what is happening, it's like a domino game. You know the dominoes falling over? It's like a switchboard where the connections are being made in a computer. Very swiftly. You see the misery, then it switches to the realization that it is inevitable, you can't change it, it has happened already, then it switches to the realization that you should avoid the natural human reaction of emotion, of misery, and instead go into the next mode to try to deal with the situation. Simply remain practical, take control, do not allow yourself to be taken down by it. That is what sattva gives you. If you practice meditation regularly, it becomes second nature to act and react based on realization, based on contemplation. So that totally changes the way that you live your life and the way that your life turns out in the way that you experience it. There will be much less conflict, much less misery, suffering, just because you can see it. You can see it happening, allowing you to take action. Instead of drowning in the pain and drowning in the misery, you simply go into another mode. In a practical mode, where you deal with the issue as a practical issue and not an ego issue. It's always ego that leads to the emotion and the misery that we suffer. Then in the eyes of other people, you become a much more pleasant person to deal with. Been there, done that. Know all about it. Being an unpleasant person to deal with. Leading to a lot of misery, which would perpetuate if you're not aware of it, but you draw your conclusions and you make adjustments. You open your heart. Questions? A lot to digest, huh? Okay, let's have a short break.